Well, hello and welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn, and my very special guest today is Steve Weltman. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm good, thank you. All things considered.
Oh, I'll tell you what, there's a lot to consider at the moment, isn't there?
Yes, there's an awful lot to consider.
But one of the great things helping us through the consideration is the release today, the 5th of March, of the brilliant new album, the posthumous album from Ken Hensley, the My Book of Answers. And what an incredible story leading all the way up to that.
Yeah, it's quite amazing how that came together. If you want me to give you a highlight and bullet points of how it did.
Well, we'd do more than that. What I'd love to do is to put it into context, first of all, because you yourself, so those who don't know, people will know Ken Hensley because they'll know Uriah Heep and all that sort of glorious moment. Mm-hmm. But your journey to managing Ken just before he passed in at the end of last year is quite an extraordinary journey because you touched on virtually everybody in the music industry. I mean, you started yourself as a T-boy, wasn't it? 1964. I loved all of that. Working with the wonderful Brian Epstein. Tell me about that.
Well, I was 15 years old. I'd like to point out my parents at the time were very loving but weak, and you could legally leave school at 15. I was, along with many other teenagers, an absolute Beatles fan, a music fan, a pop fan, whatever, rock fan. And I happened to see an ad 2 days after I left school for Nems Enterprises. That was the name of Brian's company. And went along. My parents bought me a suit because I was going for a job interview and they thought you had to be.
Yep.
So I went along, and that was an experience in itself because Brian's office was in Argyle Street. It's about 3 doors down from the London Palladium. So same street as an exit from Oxford Circus Tube Station. So I came out of Oxford Circus Tube, turned left into Argyle Street, which was absolutely just young kids.
Yeah.
And of course I thought, oh, they're all hoping to come and see, because Brian not only looked after the Beatles, but he looked after most of the Liverpool acts at the time.
All the Merseyside acts. He looked after
Billy
Cilla
Kramer,
as well.
Cilla, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I walked past them all, go into Argyle House where 6'5" Scouser called Fred says, where you going, La? And I said, pulled out my letter. I said, I've got an interview with Mr. Peter Brown. And he said, so that lot outside, you'll have to wait outside. We're going to make an announcement. So I went outside, went to the back of the queue. 10 minutes later, he came out with a megaphone saying, right, we're going to start in alphabetical order. So being a Weltman and 15, and it was 2 o'clock, I'm thinking, like, I'm going to be here forever, for the rest of my life. As it turned out, it was about 3 hours odd. And I got into Peter's office, who I now know at the time was more bored than I was waiting, because he literally had to repeat. Because I sat down and he said, right, I can't remember if it was 9 o'clock start or 9:30. But he told me my hours, and I said, hey, hang on a minute. I said, forget all that. I said, what's this job pay? I said, I've been waiting there 3.5 hours. And he said, whatever, I don't know, 3 guineas. And I said, well, that's no good to me after waiting all that time. I'm worth more than that. And he just hit his intercom and said, I think it was Maureen, and just said, if there's anybody left, I found the cheeky sod we want. And he took me on. And So yeah, that's kind of how I started. The first,
it's that sort of thing about standing out from the crowd, isn't it? Because everybody wanted to work at that sort of stage, as you say, massive queue of people with Weltman at the end of the thing. Argyle Street is just round the corner from Carnaby Street, so the whole atmosphere must have been really buzzing in those days. So tell me about your life there. 1964 it was the height of the Beatles, it was the height of Cilla, height of the Mersey sound. Tell me about your life with Brian.
Well, from what I remember, I mean, the first few week in my little cubby hole, you know, with a Franklin machine and a tea and a kettle, and a few times the Beatles came in, and I'd sit there like, and then after, you know, few weeks, they just had 2 arms like me and 1 head and 2 legs, and it was probably John, who I shouldn't say on TV, but was probably my favourite, came in and asked me to make him a cup of tea. Came in, put the kettle on, gave him the tea. I gave him the tea, and I turned round to get some mail that needed to be Franklin. I stood up, and he went, "Oh shit!" And excuse me, sorry about that, and spilt the tea over my desk. And again, being naive and 15 to business, he turned around and he said, "I'm sorry, Steve." He said, "Yeah, clean it up." And I turned around and said, "Clean it your bleep, 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 bleep self. You spilt it." And all deference, he got a couple of little cloths that were on the side by the kettle and did. And that's when I thought, what a good bloke. But he's a bloke.
Yeah.
Just, you know, just like me. And so the times they were in, I mean, Cilla was fantastic. I mean, just what you saw was what you got with Cilla. And in fact, and this is no joke, 3-4 years ago, Christmas, I'm in the perfume area in Harrods.
Yeah.
And this voice behind me says, "Hasn't got the hair anymore, but I'll never forget the voice." And I turned around and it was Cilla.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. And just, God bless her. I mean, you know, just, it was amazing, amazing.
And what's lovely, Steve, about it as well is, as you say, if you treat people, and we all deal with the biggest A-list celebrities on the planet, treat them like real people, because you can have good days and terrible days and everything else. But actually, just say it as it is. That's what got you a job in the first place with Brian. That's why John Lennon loved you, and that's why Cilla remembered you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, also Peter Brown, who was one of the directors, who was immortalized in a Beatles song, named in a Beatles song, The Ballad of John and Yoko.
Yeah.
With the line, Peter Brown called to say, "You can get married this day." And probably for me, the greatest record man ever was a man called Ahmet Ertegun. And Ahmet founded Atlantic Records, and amongst others was responsible for signing Aretha Franklin, Otis Redding, the Stones, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I mean, Bette Midler, so on and so on and so on. And Ahmet's sadly passed away in 2007. And as opposed to a memorial service, Mika, his wife, arranged a private memorial concert at the Rose P. Hall Jazz Theatre at the Lincoln Center in New York, and which I was invited to, so I knew them both well. And literally, some beautiful theatres, about 800 seats. And I arrived, sat down, and a tap on my shoulder. And it said, "Never forget the voice. The hair's gone." I turned around, it was Peter Brown.
Was that right? They've all got. He nicked a line from Cilla.
I know, and it was amazing. And Peter knew Armit well. Peter was involved in a huge, big corporate PR company based in New York, and actually appearing that night for Armit. You name them, they appeared. You know, from Eric Clapton. I mean, David Geffen himself, who's known to have a rather larger ego than most, got up on stage and spoke the most humble speech, referential speech you could probably ever hear. Eric Clapton played a couple of songs, then Michael Bloomberg came out and spoke. And the first thing Michael Bloomberg, the mayor of New York, said was, not many people can say Eric Clapton opened for them. You know, and, you know, Phil Collins appeared, Genesis appeared, you know, Bette Midler. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And the night ended with Crosby, Stills and Nash singing an a cappella version of the Beatles' In My Life. Right. And then they were joined by Neil Young. So I was happy as a pig in the proverbial. That was quite remarkable.
It is incredible. And that's what you get. You get in the music industry, some real characters. And it's what we were saying beforehand, is that if people are genuine, if you prick me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh? Underneath it all, we're all the same, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, I record producer I know last week sent me a photo of a coffee mug. And on the coffee mug, it said, it was better, music was better when it was made by ugly people. And that's a kind of, you know, his little knock to, you know, everything today is so clinical, so sterile, so fabricated. Whereas, and it's, you know, I'm a modernist, but from that era, everything was real. Yeah. And none of us, I mean, you know, Epstein was the first one to say, it was by your mistakes. You know, we didn't plan this or we didn't plan that. We had a better luck. Yeah. You know, I mean, and the record business, you learn by your faults and mistakes, you know, not by the good things you did.
And you're right, everything is finding their way in that sort of stage. But at the same time, they realized it wasn't so much about the brand as the brand. You had to turn around. There was a lot of hype. People were being manufactured. There were stories. I mean, talk about fake news. We've had it forever. Stories being created about various people and so on and so forth. I mean, you mentioned about Atlantic. Obviously, you moved from working with Brian to Polydor and Atlantic, and you were working with Led Zeppelin and Aretha. Talk to me about some of those days.
Well, and that side it was predominantly sales and marketing, and that was my first learning of that curve. And again, I mean, it was just extraordinary. Well, one, you know, when you heard the first Led Zeppelin album, it could have been, you know, an alien from an alien planet, because there was nothing like it. And Aretha Franklin, I mean, for me to this day, is the greatest female singer voice I've ever heard. And I was lucky in later life to see her live. And
where did you see her?
In America.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, she really had a gift. I mean, I know it's a cliche, and nobody's had a gift like, other people have had gifts, but her gift was absolutely unique. And you know, it obviously came from her childhood, her father being a Baptist minister. And if your viewers haven't seen it, okay, very brief history on Aretha, because I love Aretha. Is that okay?
Of course.
So Aretha was signed by Armit, okay, and worked with Jerry Rexler, a great producer, and was a huge star. And in the younger people who are watching, you know, civil rights only ended in America in 1966. And so there was still, sadly as today, that, you know, there were areas that African Americans were kind of were their own. One of them was a place called Watts in LA, which is, you know, in the Compton area. And in 1972, Aretha decided to go into a Baptist church there and do a gospel concert. And Atlantic got Sidney Lumet, the film director, to film it.
I see amazing footage, isn't it?
Yeah. And they recorded and filmed it. But the technology then, 72, they couldn't marry the audio to the film. The album came out, the biggest selling album to this day in gospel music. And then about X years ago, technology changed, and whoever decided, oh, let's see if it could work together. And we have 3 sons. And whenever it was 3 years ago, and its premiere at the National Film Theatre on the South Bank on Father's Day, my kids took me out for a meal, for a lunch, and then took me to the South Bank for the premiere of Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure about Aretha's voice, you think there's better voices, or you're not sure about me talking about a gift, just go watch it. Yeah. Just go. I mean, it was actually on BBC Two this year, a few weeks ago, a month ago.
Yeah.
So on their iPlayer, you could probably find it, but it is absolutely extraordinary.
No, it's stunning, and people say you're right. People come up with so many cliches, and you miss out what are truly great. And one of the great voices is a fantastic performance. And now that technology is advanced, and you can sync, you absolutely get the image together with that sort of stuff. And the hairs, they say, stand up on the back of every part of your body, basically, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you when you see the film, I mean, obviously there's audience shots, so you can see the effect.
Yeah.
And then you'll also catch a glimpse of Mick Jagger,
right. That's right.
who went to the church, you know. And again, this was 72. Because, you know, there's not an artist alive that doesn't revere Aretha Franklin.
I think that's right. And she didn't like to travel, though, did she?
She didn't like to fly.
Yeah, exactly.
So at Armit's memorial service, she appeared on a video screen.
Right.
Yeah.
Why was that? Do you remember? I mean, it's some people have a scare at different stages. It's
flying.
Yeah.
For me.
Oh, for her.
I don't know if she had a scare or, you know, but if, you know, I mean, I've had odd moments, but nothing, you know, that I'm not going to martyr myself, but no, I do know a lot of bands who've had some experiences.
I know. Well, the night the music died, I mean, Buddy Holly very famously around that sort of time. That's and we just commemorated that very recently, a few weeks ago.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
It's so extraordinary. But you then went, I mean, as you say, you're doing every aspect of the music industry, which is a really fascinating journey, because that's the way that you learn your craft. You take the chances, you be yourself, so you're not kowtowing to everybody, you speak your mind, you're picking up all bits of knowledge from doing the tea to doing the books to doing the marketing and so on and so forth. Yep. You then went on to Musicland record stores, actually the other side. Tell me about those days.
Well, that was just fantastic. I actually, I don't know if it's on my notes, I had a spell first before Musicland at a chain called Harlequin.
Right.
And then went to Musicland. And, you know, this was actually probably my favorite time in the business ever, because we got everything.
Yeah. Not
just the company you were at, you know, you got everything. And in those days, you know, there were listening booths. And, you know, in my case, because I was vociferous, that I put things in the window.
Right.
That I wanted to put in, not what the chain wanted to do, or you know, offered money to put in the window. And you know, and we had, I mean, all the pirate DJs in the days of Radio London and Caroline, and you know, from Johnny Walker and Peel and Everett and Kid Gents, and they were always coming in to get music because we had an incredible selection, and we also had a fantastic American import section, and I absolutely adored it. I you know, somebody would come in, they'd be browsing around, and you had music on from the moment you opened the door of the shop, even before you opened it to the public, until you locked up to go home. Yeah. And you play music all day. And what was great is you would turn people on. You know, be playing something, and somebody would come up the counter and say, "What's playing?" And you say, "Oh, I'm playing Andrew's new album." Yeah. And they go, "Oh, go into number 4. And you can
love my new album.
You can have a listen to it." So, yeah, I mean, they were wonderful days. And through that, a chap came in to the shop, and I was selling tickets for concerts at the Lyceum.
Right.
And I seemed to be selling most of his advance tickets out of our little shop. And then he started a record label called Charisma Records.
Absolutely.
Partnered up with B&C Records.
Tony Stratton Smith, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there'll be a book on his life finally coming out June this year.
Oh, brilliant. It won't be one man, it's a huge life.
Yeah, I mean,
incredible guy, wasn't he?
Yeah. I mean, that's a 5-hour documentary just to talk to you about him.
Yeah. Well, we're bringing you back to talk about Tony, but fascinating days. And I think what people miss, and I miss those days where you go along, you maybe listen to the charts, you pop along to a record shop. You're right, it would introduce you to new music, but you'd have a physical disc, wouldn't you? And there was that sort of wonderful anticipation of going in and browsing through. We've lost all of that now, haven't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is because in society, we've lost time. You know, everything is fast now. People want everything immediately. So the era you're referring to, or I grew up in rather, one of the greatest thrills, even with the record shop, there'd be certain records that came in. And right, I'm buying that. I used to get a better price, of course, so I get one from the rep. Yeah. And I couldn't wait to get home and listen to a whole album. Or call a few mates. I've got the so-and-so record. Let's all come round. Yeah. You know, or I'd have mates call me and say, "Oh, I've just got the new Floyd album." And you go around and listen, you know. And people although we all worked very hard, and, you know, people had time, made time. And today, you know, it's just got, well, for young people, it's got harder and harder because society is so instant and so photoshopped. So,
and it applies across all of this. I mean, we look at all sort of aspects from the news. You know, it's not so much about making sure it's accurate; it's making sure you're the first. And so there's that immediacy about everything. That they remind us that you talk about the newspaper. If you don't get the newspaper, you're misinformed. If you do get if you don't get the newspaper, you're ill-informed. If you do get it, you're misinformed. And you work on that sort of basis. Everything's twisted. It's all instant. You're missing out on all these things.
And if you get one paper, you get a politically left point of view, another paper with a right, then another one's kind of down the middle, another one that's not sure. Yeah. You get news flashes on your phones all the time from media. It's all very fast food.
And the trouble as well, Steve, is that what happens is everybody just confirms their own prejudices, don't they? They get all their news from one source. They surround themselves with people who just confirm that view. And they don't bother looking at the other aspects. And I think it's the same with music. The great thing about coming to the music shop, you would see Steve behind the counter and say, "Have you heard this?" Or you'll be playing something. And people don't have that environment anymore now. You're inundated with stuff, which means that you want the instant fix and so on and so forth. But the opportunities to launch artists are really difficult now, is it, to get heard amongst this cacophony?
Yes, it's and I feel for the younger acts. It's never been harder. It still requires the same commitment as the acts I grew up with, but it's just so much more difficult. And sadly, I do blame, well, it's not blame the record companies, but you know, when I started, there were certainly the record business was created by music people who were in this business.
Yeah.
Today, it's business people who are in music. Yeah. You know, at its peak, there were, what, 14 major corporate record labels.
Yeah.
Now there's 3.5.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the great labels that built this industry in England, Island Records, Chrysalis, Charisma, Stiff, blah, blah, blah. They've all been bought by corporations. In America, Elektra, Asylum, Geffen, A&M, all been bought by major corporations. So, yeah, you've got a label that exists, you know. Everybody knows Ireland, predominantly because of U2 and Marley, right? They were global. And Ireland still exists. And Ireland do a great job, and they will tell you they're an independent, but they can't be independent because they're part of Universal. And a corporate has to have a view for what?
Yeah, the bottom line. I mean, that's what happens.
Investors, shareholders.
Yeah.
And Universal also are going to float part of their company, which is public knowledge. Next year, they're going to actually float, I think it's in, is it Holland or Belgium? Right. And, you know, Warner's are a public company. Sony's, you know, I mean, so they, you know, we floated, started a company to acquire copyrights and labels at the end of 2004. We raised the money and floated on the AIM market.
Zest Group.
Zest, yeah. And I mean, the theory of it was fantastic, and the beginning of it was fantastic. And it's now, there's companies around at the moment that are really active in trying to buy rights. Yeah. So it's kind of, we were trying to do it. Well, I was doing it before them, but I couldn't get the backing. Yeah. Basically, the chairman of the company, I was the chief exec. He was a great guy. Young guy, city guy. And the idea was I'd take care of the music side and he'd do everything at city side. And that was okay with the first kind of 6 months to a year. And then it got like further and further. And then to acquire something publicly, you have a chap called a nomad, which is short for nominated advisor. And you pay them a lot of money, and they're that's my worst experience in my life. Okay. Yeah, because he basically, I was trying to buy a particular company that, if you like, their books weren't run as well as a public company. There was no fraud, no theft. It was just the way they moved money around, like most small companies. And we had an auditor, so we had it all signed off by them, you know, financial side, but he kept convincing the rest of the people that we shouldn't go ahead, the board. So, and that cost us, I can't remember, about £600,000 in professional fees. And I started thinking, well, hang on a minute, I could have made 20 albums for that, signed 20 bands. So I left 2009. But that's where the business is. I mean, today, you know, if you yourself had, you know, 5 albums and 50 songs, and you decided, David, you know, you were earning a little bit of money every year. That was like your pension. But then you decided you want to cash in your pension. There's never been a better time than now to sell rights.
And people are absolutely looking at it. There have been great examples. As you know, my background is as an intellectual property lawyer. So I've had the joy of working with some of the biggest firms, started life as a barrister. And it's all about rights and understanding it. But the people who get it right, though, Steve, are not those who just view things as here's another baked bean factory. And so often, if it's just about the money, you're missing out on those sort of creative side as well. You have to understand that artists are unique. And so many people have publicly spoken about this. When EMI was swallowing all sorts of people up and got the money men in, lots of artists felt as though that they don't really understand us. And if you don't understand us, you're not going to get the best out of us. So people like Tony Stratton Smith, who set up, as you say, in 1969, which ties in beautifully with our friends at Uriah Heep, because 1969, that's when Tony set up Charisma. You joined them at that stage, didn't you? You were there, and you worked with Genesis, and you worked with Monty Python, and you were doing a bit of everything. But those sort of days, going back to that experience that you had, and it's really interesting because a lot of people forget this, and we don't document it. And whilst Tony's book's coming out, if you don't document it, people just think this is the music industry. Take a snapshot of 2021. That's what the music industry is like. Looking back at the 70s and that sort of time when the industry was really getting underway, it is so important to document that because so many lessons can be learned, can't they?
Very much so, very much so. And you know, as you just said, and I said it's kind of a little earlier about we made so many mistakes and it was your faults you learned from, and the development. And again, you know, there were different times. I mean, getting tracks played on radio, it wasn't easy, but it was a damn sight easier than it is today. And you know, also remember, I mean, Radio 1, you know, when I started in the business, I can't even remember if Radio 1 had started. Can't even remember.
Yeah.
It was Luxembourg, you know, transistor under the sheets when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's the industry now is so much, everything's data. Yeah. There was a wonderful piece in the I newspaper, I don't know, it was 3-4 years ago, when they were focusing on music and analytics. And it was a very interesting piece. And then they went to a gentleman, brilliant A&R man called Corder Marshall. Yeah. You know, who's got a fantastic history. Yeah. And they asked him, and so his view was, well, yeah, I mean, we've got to have these analytics because they exist. Yeah. But he said, what would have happened? The article actually said, you know, but what would have happened to Neil Young and Bob Dylan if they emerged just today? What would their analytics look like? Yeah. And they wouldn't. Yeah. You know, and so again, it's balance. But today, I mean, for better or worse, across all the record labels, big or small, predominantly, if the head of A&R wanted to sign an act, even if there are objections from above or below or on the side, he'd sign the act. A&R is A&R, okay? It's nothing to do with anything else. But today, certainly in all the major labels, there's no A&R man makes a decision to sign a band. You've got international involved, marketing, sales, promote, everybody. Well, where does it end? You know, it's just, and in that sense, I am old-fashioned because you know, if I was running a label now and you were head of A&R and you came in and said, I've just found this act, it's fantastic. You played me some songs and I said, I'm not that keen. Yeah. And you turned around and said, right, well, I'll sign it. Yeah. If it doesn't happen, I'll resign. Yeah. You don't like it. Yeah. You know, that's what used to happen. You know, and
you need the
people don't take chances. I mean, I got into a lot of SHI thingy at Charisma, right? Because I was going back to Charisma and I'd worked with Malcolm McLaren and Bow Wow Wow at RCA.
Yeah.
Was going back to Charisma, and been in New York with Malcolm, and where we'd experienced the most extraordinary things. One, we heard a record in a club called Planet Rock by Africa Bambaataa,
right,
which was a white label,
yeah,
which literally made you sit there like this, mouth agog, and it lasted about 9 minutes, the original white label.
right,
And I'd never heard anything like it, ever. And then we went out to a show of Africa Bambaataa and the Zulu Nation. But the show was in the South Bronx at 3 o'clock in the morning on a disused site. And we saw what I learned were breakdancers. We saw graffiti artists. We saw MCs. We saw rappers. We saw scratchers. It was just incredible. And I was going back to Charisma, and no disrespect to anybody at Charisma or Strat, but Strat had lost his grip, Charisma had lost its grip, and they'd become a label that was really just putting out Peter Gabriel and Genesis records. And I wanted to sign Malcolm, and people thought I was insane, right? Because of his reputation, because he wasn't an artist, but he had an idea. I mean, Malcolm was an iconoclast. Yeah. You know, he was a subversive child. I'm halfway through his book at the moment. 852 pages.
there you go.
A great read.
Yeah.
And most interesting guy I ever met in music.
But he was brilliant. We touched on this beforehand about media manipulation. He was brilliant at dominating the headlines, whether it's work with the Sex Pistols, whether it's work with Vivian, marriage with Vivian, all down Kings. He revolutionized things, and he knew he knew what to do, didn't he?
Absolutely, Andrew. I mean, and it's great. I mean, yeah, he could position himself or an act or anything he was involved with better than any marketing guy with 50 degrees or any analytics.
Yeah.
I mean, the record we made was called Duck Rock.
Yeah.
And that record cost a lot of money to make, a lot of money to promote. And basically it broke hip hop outside of New York and LA. And the rest of the world, and it spawned, I mean, the breakdance kids we'd seen, we brought them in and filmed them for the first single, a song called Buffalo Girls.
Absolutely.
And that
around the outside, Buffalo Girls go around the outside.
Absolutely,
I remember that. It's brilliant.
And so that was extraordinary.
Yeah.
So we signed them at the Charisma. We made a record. Their first single was called Hey You, the Rocksteady Crew.
Yeah.
And certainly up to the time, 80s I left, but I think right up until maybe the 2000s, it was the biggest selling single in Charisma's history.
Right.
And it was global. Just extraordinary. And the rappers, the world's famous Supreme team are on Duck Rock.
Yep. They
made an album which spawned what is today a club classic still. Yep. But Malcolm had, as you say, manipulation. It was the vision to manipulate. He had the idea to manipulate. I got the famous Trevor Horn to produce that record. And I remember going into Psalm to Trevor and Jill and saying, I've just signed Malcolm McLaren, I want you to make a record. And he burst out laughing. I mean, literally, it was like, what? I wish I had it on film. Right. I can see it now still. And he said, Malcolm McLaren. He said, he's a manager. And I said, yeah. He said, does he play? And I said, no. He said, does he write music? I said, no. I said, write some lyrics. He'll write some lyrics. And he said, you want me to produce? And I said, yeah. And I said, it will be sensational if you hear me out. So I just gave him the background of what Malcolm and I had discussed, and then put them two together. You can imagine what that was like.
Yes.
You know, the very laid back Trevor and the amphetamine charged. No, I'm not saying he took amphetamines, but you know, Malcolm was a ball of energy 24/7. And it worked. And, you know, we recorded, I mean, there are tracks on that album that he never gave us the real credit that Paul Simon heard that inspired his album, Graceland.
Right.
A particular song called Roly Poly, if you ever get the chance.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Great song.
But we recorded, you couldn't go to South Africa because it was on what the Musicians Union then called a blacklist. But we wanted to. We wanted to record with some real Zulu musicians. So we went through the process, got a great guy called Phil Hollis as a fixer in South Africa, got permission off the MU, and the MU's rules were we had to pay the musicians full MU rate, which was great. After the first few days, one of the players, you know, we paid him in cash. So he left on a Friday with his 4 days cash, whatever it was. Monday morning, never showed up. Tuesday, so we had to get somebody else in. It turned out that was so much money, he'd gone back to KwaZulu land, bought a wife and cattle and settled down.
Bought a wife and cattle as you do on a Friday night. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Incredible.
But again, I mean, just extraordinary. And I think, if I'm right, that we also timed it where the Buffalo Gal song,
yeah,
Vivian had created the Buffalo Gal look.
Yeah.
So that was in the video, and the album Duck Rock was used by her. I believe she was the first designer to show in Paris, the first one to use music on the catwalk, and it was Duck Rock.
And they were such a creative force, Malcolm and Vivian together. Yeah. And their son, Joe Corey, is still the driving force behind it. He founded Agent Provocateur, and he's got Charles of the Jago and that sort of stuff. And he's a brilliant sort of mastermind and knows how to command media attention. And they're doing for a lot of good. Vivian's still doing lots of stuff environmentally to make people aware of climate change, so using her position there. But it is those real characters which it's so important to document, because we're now becoming blancmange-like, aren't we? If you miss out on the characters in this industry, I think you forget about it, because before you returned to Charisma, you were at RCA as well with Bowie, and you had Bonnie Tyler there, and you got a gold disc, didn't you, when Elvis died in August '77? Tell us about that gold disc.
I think I'd just gone to RCA. It wasn't 70, whatever.
77 it was, 77.
Early, and I'd gone into a meeting, was asked to go to a meeting. And so I turned up in the boardroom, and it was internal. And I was talking about Elvis and ideas for different campaigns. And it was, you know, this was a big record company then. Mm-hmm. And I was this young guy, had come from a completely, utterly non-corporate background. And it all felt very boring to me. And so long story short, I said, well, why don't we do something different? So within a week, we had this idea I gave this idea of taking Elvis's 16 #1 UK singles and putting them in their original American picture bags, and then putting all those in a little handheld box. Just a black box with, you know, Elvis in gold on it, 16 #1s. And I had the privilege of getting Colonel Tom's permission to do that for the man. That
must be quite interesting. How was your conversation with Colonel Tom?
Actually, I can't martyr myself. It was funny. because he loved the idea,
Yeah.
but he wanted to see everything.
Yeah.
You know, and if you've got time,
but
I'll tell you a brilliant story about him. But yeah, so we put that together. We announced it to the trade, and at that time, you know, RCA had its own vinyl manufacturing plant up in Washington on Tyneside, and but it was only going to be the box. You couldn't buy it individually originally. So it came out, went absolutely apeshit. All the singles had gone to radio.
Right.
And then within 2 weeks, because of the sales of the box and the radio, I think we had about 14 of the 16 songs entered the top 30. And it's, you know, flying all over the world.
Yeah.
And then sadly, in August that year, he passed.
16th of August, 1977. I remember it well. And he was number 42 in the charts.
Well, I was
he was 42 himself. And I
was then working with Bowie.
Yeah.
And RCA's plant, we had to get David and everybody else on RCA's records made at EMI and Warner's plants,
right,
and wherever, because all the RCA plant was doing was making Elvis records. But there's a great story on Elvis. It's not my story, but an extraordinary Hollywood impresario called Jerry Weintraub, who started as a promoter in, I think, the late 60s in America. And he started promoting, I think he was the first guy to promote Led Zeppelin, promote Sinatra, and he tried to get appointments with the Colonel to promote Elvis, and he just couldn't get an appointment. So every day for a year, he sent him a telegram. And finally got a meeting, and Elvis came back and Jerry was the promoter. Now, the Colonel's contracts, this was, and it was one tour, a stadium tour, where every seat had to have a bottom in it. Everything had to be sold. Yeah. Okay. No excuses, nothing. Everything's got to be sold out. Not one empty chair in the house. And it had all been going swimmingly. And I think in like 6 weeks' time, they were due in, I can't remember the name of it, the old stadium that's not there anymore in Miami. And, you know, 60,000 odd people. And it was selling great, but it wasn't sold out. So Jerry was taking more radio, more TV, and it's come like the last 2 weeks, and he's still got 1,600 seats. Then a week, he's still got 600 seats. And then the day before the show, he's still got 600 seats. So Jerry decided he had all the seats removed from the venue, so that every seat was filled. I thought that was a lovely story. And the other one was Jerry taking him, the Colonel done a deal for Elvis to do a residency in Vegas. I can't remember if it's the Hilton or, yeah. And so Jerry's arranged to meet Colonel Tom at the hotel. He pulls up in his limo. Jerry's there. He's got the manager of the hotel and the assistant manager. And they walk him into the lobby, put him in the elevator. And the lobby's got, you know, cutouts of Elvis. Everywhere you look, Elvis. They get in the elevator. They go up to the penthouse floor. And Elvis has got the whole floor. They show him the accommodation. He gives it, great. Comes back down, walks out, looks around the lobby again. Fine. Calls for his car. Says, Jerry, he said, when we come back here in 2 weeks' time, just make sure that there are pictures of Elvis in that elevator, because there weren't any. You know, his eye for that. And that was part of that side of of Elvis.
Yeah, and it was incredible. And another great story that I heard is that he went to one concert and Elvis saw that there were badges saying, "I love Elvis," but there were also some badges saying, "I hate Elvis." And he asked the Colonel about that, and he said, "Absolutely, we make money from both of them, so just embrace it." So I love that whole idea, that sort of marketing.
Yeah.
Has to make that make sense, which is great.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great story. I like that. I like.
Well, the great time at Charisma, as you say, Tony Stratton-Smith, it's slightly different things. You were introducing brilliant artists such as Malcolm McLaren. You also established a relationship with Julian Lennon, didn't you?
Well, I signed Julian to his first deal. Yeah. And yeah, it was a wonderful time. I mean, you know, Julian, that was what, 80, was it 82 or 3? I think it was 20 or 19 when we signed him. Yeah. Right. And, you know, just a very, I won't say naive, but just a brand new artist, you know.
Did he, like his father, did he spill his tea on your desk and you told him where to go?
Julian was just a delight. And, you know, once we'd signed him, which was another story, but once we'd signed him, which we signed him for records and publishing. And once we signed him, you know, Strat thought it'd be great for him to go away to write because he didn't have enough material. We signed him on a couple of songs, which were good, but demos. So he went away and he went away to a place Strat knew of, which became the title of the first album, The Lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we made the record. About 2 months before we were ready to go, he came in to see me. He said, "I want to change my name." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, I don't want to be Julian Lennon. I said, "But you are. Why?" And he said, "Well, I think, you know, people might buy this record because it's my name, not because of what's on it." And I said, "Julian, you can call yourself Fred Smith. There's still a percentage of people around the world will buy it because you are Julian Lennon. So be proud of the name and stay with it." So he did. And then that was another experience for both of us. Then, you know, we decided on the first 2 singles, and the first single was always going to be Too Late for Goodbyes. So 80s, so I had to make the proverbial video. Well, with the record, it was a case of who do you get to produce a kid with a surname of Lennon, son of John, who's really got almost no experience in a studio. So we didn't need a young hip person. So I went to New York and got Ferrone to agree to produce. So it was like having a professor and a primary school kid. And it was fantastic because at the beginning of the recording, if you were there, so Phil would be with Brad, his engineer, at the desk, and Julian would be possibly the furthest point away at the back of the room you could be. And then as, if you like, Phil educated him and Julian got more experienced, by the time we got to mixing, Julian's at the desk with Brad, Phil was sitting at the back, reading his New York Times, speaking to his stockbroker or heads of any other record labels, because he was a huge producer. And that was wonderful. But then we had to make video. So I wanted to go down the same process. So we all agreed we needed somebody old, like a professor. So we got Sam Peckinpah. Sam was not in the greatest of health, you know, the pacemaker, but it was an extraordinary experience, you know, working with Sam and a gentleman called Alex Phillips, who was his director of photography. Who I think when we met him, Alex had already made 115 motion pictures. 115,
yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing, isn't it?
And there's, I don't know if it's been, excuse me, told before, but it's a great story with Sam. So you see the video, Julian's at a keyboard, yeah, playing, yeah. And Sam wants a particular look from Julian. So it's like look from there to there. And he can't get the look. So he calls a break. Has a chat with one of his ADs. A couple of hours later, we start again. And the AD comes in, he's got a brown paper bag. So we all sat with Julian. He says, right, he says, what's in this bag I'm going to put on the keyboard, and I just want you to watch this, right? Because it will move across your keyboard. So what is it? And it was a white mouse. So a little bit of food reward at the end of the keyboard was placed. Mouse was released there, across the keyboard. Sam gets the look.
Brilliant. I love it. Fantastic.
Yeah, and Sam was telling us, I mean, you know, his famous films, you know, Straw Dogs, Wild Bunch and so on, never shot to a script.
Yeah.
You know, had the story, would sit down, talk with the actors, and then let them go. Fascinating, man. Fascinating.
And it's what we touched on beforehand. It's those characters, isn't it, Steve, that bring out the best in people. Where you're not saying, here's your formula, this is how you do it. You allow some sort of flexibility, you allow that creative juices to flow. Very much so. I mean, just you're so right. And you know, it's not for me to knock other artists, but I think, you know, in the last 20 years, you know, I mean, you know, music's pretty, it's pretty processed. It's pretty data analytics driven. Yeah. You know, I'm not going to name names, but I mean, there's been a few things that I've found in some way were in their own way unique. Not many. You know, I love the Arctic Monkeys. Musically and lyrically, you know, and they're great live. But you know, when you think, and I'm not coming full circle, but you started off by mentioning Ken Hensley and Uriah Heep. Okay. So in October last year, record label BMG have the Heep catalogue. Okay. Put out a box set, 50 years in rock. Limited edition, you know, it sold out the day it was released. Okay. So thousands and thousands of people around the world that have got that physically or digitally, okay, are probably people, let's say 95, 98% of people had got previous Heat product. And maybe the other 2% was the first time. So in 50 years' time from now, yeah, are people going to be buying Little Mix's box set or Dua Lipa? You know? And it's tricky. I mean, it's like, because you've done so much of it, you understand the management, you understand the market. I mean, you managed Nazareth for a period of time as well. All yeah, of these sort of things, you have a look at that sort of aspect. And as you say, you need characters. When Strat sold to Virgin the first time, yep, in '83 was the first time. It was then absorbed. No. Well, no, it was sold to Virgin in the first time in '83. It was absorbed into the Virgin brand, I thought, in '86. No, sorry. And so you get your facts right. Go on then. Charisma had been distributed by phonogram. Okay. For many, many years. And when I became the managing director, I thought that relationship was not great. So I moved Charisma to Virgin for distribution in '83. Yes. In fact, the managing director then of Virgin, when it was announced I'd signed Julian, yeah, called me up and said, oh, he said, yeah, we were kind of thinking about signing Julian, but didn't. And I said, well, I'm really glad. He said, yeah, I don't think it will happen. So I was really glad to phone him up and say, oh, Armit's just sent me my first platinum record. But that was purely a distribution deal. Distribution deal in '83. And yep, then they absorbed sales. Yeah, I was at a Virgin
label international meeting in Amsterdam, and there was a break, and I went out to walk down the canals, and Richard came with me and said, "Do you think Strat would be interested in selling the company?" I said, "I don't know. Why don't you ask him?" And he said, "Well, would you?" And I said, "Sure." And when I came back a day or two later, I sat with Strat, who was the most eloquent of men. And I said, Richard wants to know if you're interested in selling the company. And the first thing he said to me, he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "It's your company." I said, "Everybody knows that Richard is going to go public. And he wants charisma for the name of Genesis and Peter Gabriel, maybe Monty Python on the roster when the flotation goes out. Apart from that, I don't know." And I said, "What do you think, Tony?" And he said, "My dear boy, I'm starting to feel a little old in a room full of teenagers. Maybe I should."
Glorious moment. So that then happened in, as you say, started with distribution in 83, then went into the purchase. Richard did buy it in 86. And then Virgin itself was purchased by EMI, wasn't it, in 92? Because I was looking after the law firm that did all the due diligence for EMI. During that stage. So, and I remember going through all these contracts as they were buying virtually everything in sight. So that was, I do remember that very specifically, many hours, many nights going through these extraordinary deals.
Yeah. It's, it doesn't break my heart, and you'll read the book. I just, again, it's like what I said earlier, Andrew, and I think you realize and know as well as me that having the identity of an Island Records within a Universal, you still got it. There still are, Amy Winehouse is on Island. Yeah. And I'm sure Chris Blackwell would have been thrilled when I believe Nick Gatfield actually signed Amy when he was president of Island in the UK. But, Charisma, they destroyed it.
Yeah. It's a shame, but they lost the brand.
And also there's a catalogue there that is phenomenal. Yeah. But nobody knows anything about it. Well, there are a few of us, but none of the people who know anything about it work there.
Yeah.
I think
so important. I mean, the book's going to be great. I look forward to talking about the book about Strat in the future. So many tales to tell. But that was then the catalyst for you to set up your own management company and started working with people like the Pet Shop Boys.
Yeah, it kind of was. Basically, I was trying to sign a band. I won't name, and they wanted to be on Charisma, and loads, I mean, pretty much, probably 95% of every label was trying to sign this band. Right. But they wanted to be on Charisma. So we set up a meeting with their law firm and my lawyer and me to go and kick around the parameters of a deal. So we went to the meeting, at the first meeting, and the keyboard player was there, who was kind of the pseudo manager of the band with their lawyer at that time. Yeah. And I think they wanted £460,000 advance, plus all the recording costs. Those were not ridiculous for bigger companies. And, I immediately said, look, I said, you want that kind of money? Go take it off EMI or CBS or whoever. But you come to Charisma for the commitment. We don't give away interest-free loans because that's what advances are.
Yeah, of course.
And I said, we can't afford it. And he said, you can't, Charisma can't, but Virgin can. So I'd gone from being the MD of a small independent company that actually had turned into the black because we'd had this period of Julian, McLaren, Rocksteady crew, blah, blah, blah. Genesis selling more records. And sold to Virgin. But so we were still a tiny company. Virgin were turning over hundreds of millions of pounds. And when he said, Virgin do it, it was like the penny dropped. And Richard was great. I mean, I never had any interference. Nobody on my board or, you know, my staff were fine. But that was it for me. That was time to go, being a romantic. Yeah, and I'd found an American producer earlier in the 80s and had offered him a contract to come to the UK and a decent advance and produce X amount of tracks for Charisma, and that Charisma, the guys and myself, would manage him and get him outside label work as well. So we did. There was a chap called Stephen Haig. And when I left, he came with me to my fledgling management company. And I think the second or third call I got about Stephen was from the head of EMI A&R. Went over to see him, and he had a manager with him. He said, I have an act and they want Stephen Haig to produce. And they played us some demos, and 3 of them I really liked. I think there were 5. And I said, okay, well, I'm seeing Stephen tonight, so I'll play him until I come back to you tomorrow. Played him to Stephen, he wasn't sure at all. So I went back, and then I met the act, and that was Chris and Neil, Pet Shop Boys, and they were absolutely adamant about working with Stephen. Right. And I said to EMI, I said, look, you released a song on Epic a year ago. Nothing happened to it. Can you get the rights back for it? That was West End Girls. Played it to Stephen, I said, Stephen, you've got to do this, because if you get this right as a record, it's huge. Yeah. And we did, and it did. And he did their first 3 albums. Yeah. And I suddenly thought, all these royalties are going to be coming in. I should have done this years ago. And then he decided not to pay me. Oh. I received, I've been in the studio with him on another project the night before, had a nice glass of wine afterwards. We'd had a great relationship, never had, anything. I walked in the following morning to a telex from a New York law firm saying I was in breach. And the telex was about 4.5 feet long. And it was all nonsense. And as you'll know better than me, I spoke to him and I said, look, if we don't sort this out, I said, the only people who are going to win are going to be the lawyers. And he said, well, I've been told not to speak to you. They'd file against me in Southern District in New York, which had a 9-year trial delay. And my lawyer over there said, they'll just phone you up in a couple of years and say, look, here's X, go away. And I said, this is about the principle. Don't care about the money. I really don't. So I actually took him to court in Massachusetts, which is where he was from, and took out an injunction through my lawyers up there to stop him taking another management, of which my lawyer said, you won't get, but it will bring the main issue to the judge's attention, and we'll be in federal court. And I think he may grant a fast trial. And that was exactly what happened. And when he said no to the injunction, he said to the other counsel, I've read the main issue. He said, I suggest you leave this courtroom, have a chat with your client, call your opposing counsel and start settling this matter. And we did. And we, if you like, we won. Or as my lawyer described to me, in a settlement, nobody's happy. Right. He said, because you're going to get this amount of money and you'll be thinking, great. In the back of your mind, you'll be thinking, well, if I'd have gone to full trial, I'd have got double the money.
It's always my favorite thing about litigation is the depiction in the old Punch cartoon, which has the plaintiffs pulling the horns of a cow, the defendant pulling the tail, and the lawyer milking the cow. So I think litigation is exactly that. It's best to settle. You're right. It's the best settlements when both sides go away thinking they could have got a bit more. That's the best settlement. Yes. And it's being pragmatic about it, because you turn around, we're in this business, you're going to come across each other in the future. The fact that you can do a deal and get it done and move on is really important, because otherwise, you're right, it goes on for years and years and years.
Yes, I mean, that's the only time I've ever had to contemplate court in a lifetime in the business. But I have, which I thoroughly enjoyed, being an expert witness in a few.
Yes.
A couple in the High Court here and one in the High Court in Newcastle, where Gus Dudgeon and I were experts for an artist. So, yeah, I found that fascinating.
It's calling, because you've done every aspect of the business. It calls on that sort of expertise, whether you can look at that, because you also then, as you say, you went on to manage your first band as well. Talk to me about that in '89. You had a #1 AOR single as well, didn't you, in the US?
Yeah, we had a band on Charisma that was signed before I got there. Oh, no, in my gap year period, called The Opposition.
Yeah.
And when I went back, we'd carried on with The Opposition at Charisma, but it wasn't happening. And then it kind of imploded. And the two principals wanted to start an act. And I loved them. So I signed them, signed a worldwide deal with EMI, made the first record. And I was working with a label in America called Manhattan. That was an imprint owned by EMI, but run by a great man called Bruce Lumble, one of the great A&R men ever in America, and a gentleman. He was kind of an American Strat, but with much more business acumen as well.
It's a great byline. I love it. American Strat.
and like Strat, a very gentle man. Yeah. You know, and very eloquent. Signed the act. He wanted me to ship over there for a while to help them set the record up. He had a great A&R guy called Bruce Garfield, who I'm still in touch with, and actually just had his vaccination yesterday. And that's a minor point. So record came out and it absolutely flew at radio. So then it was, you got to bring them over. So then I got to an agent I knew very well in New York, from Julian and Genesis and Peter and David. And so he took them on. So we toured, did about first batch was about 6 weeks. Ended up in the Ritz in New York. I'm sitting with Bruce Lumble, and he said, the guy I signed long time ago said he's going to be coming tonight. I said, who's that? He said, it doesn't matter. He said, I'll introduce you if he comes. And so the boys were on stage, about 4 songs. And so I'm sitting, so Bruce is kind of to my right. And he taps me on the shoulder. And he says, I want you to meet the other Bruce. I turned around, it was Bruce Springsteen, who Bruce Lumble had signed to his first deal, and was at CBS right up until he started his own label. Yeah. And just brilliant. I mean, what a guy, just real again, but special, you know, creatively. And so the boys are coming to the end of the show, their last show, they announced the last song. And I turned around to see Bruce Springsteen, who's sitting next to Bruce Lumble, and Springsteen's gone. I didn't say anything to Mr. Lumble. I just went, oh, he's gone. You know, it's fair enough. Next thing I know, the band finish and go off, and then great reaction. The band come on for an encore, and out was Bruce Springsteen with them. and does a couple of songs. And it was just amazing. And the band, you know, we made film over there, and here, and really, really good first record. Didn't do a lot over here in Europe, but critically really well acclaimed. And then on the record, on drums, because Mark was the singer and guitar player, Marcus was a bass player, and they wrote the songs. So we had to put musicians around and make the record. So I had Steve Ferrone on drums, who considered, certainly for recording, the greatest timekeeper there has been, certainly up to now. But brilliant, but expensive, you know, and I'm making a first record. So I knew Steve, so, you know, did a deal with him, and he did the record, but he did the entire album in a day and a quarter.
Wow.
That good. I mean, just amazing. And if you heard it, I mean, it's just hard to believe. But then we got to go to America, so it's I need live musicians, can't afford Steve. Spoke to Steve, and he said, oh, there's this young kid in New York. He said, you love him, take him. So we couldn't audition him, you know, because he was in there. We just took the risk on Steve's name. So a young African-American called Sterling Campbell. And then Sterling, you know, did shows in Europe with us. Then eventually the band imploded about 18 months, whatever it was, later. And then so Sterling went on his way. I can't remember if he joined Hall and Oates first, but then he became David's drummer. Yeah. Right up and really until David stopped live, about 94. Yeah. And then he went up, I think he's been playing with various bands, B-52s, I think maybe Hall and Oates as well. And then, of course, was it 6 years ago? Out of nowhere, David Bowie announces releasing the Next Day album, which nobody knew about. Nobody. The record company didn't know, the management didn't know until the day before. So I want this out tomorrow. So I called Sterling. What's this about? And he said, yeah, he said, it's amazing. He said, I can't talk about it. He said, I had to sign a 9-page waiver because I recorded it about 18 months ago. Because he's been recording on and off for ages. Yeah. And I said, when I got it, I called him back and I said, but you're only on like one or two songs? He said, yeah, because I did mine at the beginning and then I was off doing live work, so I couldn't do it. But yeah, so out of the band, you know, I met Sterling, who again, I still know to this day.
And you're right, this is what we're saying, all of these, it's interconnected, which is why it's so important to get the whole sort of history documented and things like that. I should check, are you still okay for time? Because we've got so much to cover as well, but it's so fascinating. And the reason it's so important to get all of this is that everything is connected, because there are so many lessons to be learned on that sort of basis. So you had they, like a lot of bands on the road, fell out ultimately, didn't they? And was it 91? I think they split up, didn't they?
That sounds about right, doesn't it? Because I said about 18 months after the first. Yeah, it'd be about right.
About sort of 91 they split up, but then there was sort of gap, if you like. There's that sort of period where you then signed a bit later on in 97, I think it was. You signed the Dear James for management, didn't you? Talk to me about them.
Oh yeah, this is wonderful. I'd gone to meet a friend at the Dublin Castle in Camden.
Yeah.
Famous music venue, but it's also a pub.
Yeah. And
we were sitting actually in the music venue part, and it was before acts were due on. We're just having literally a beer and having a gossip. And these two girls walked on with acoustic guitars and started playing.
Yeah.
And it was a tiny one, red-headed, and a dark-haired, tall girl.
It was a striking look, wasn't it? It really was.
And their voices were absolutely beautiful. Their harmonies were incredible. And after about 2 songs, you started actually listening to what they were singing about. And the lyrics were as good as the voices. And they're only on, I don't know, half an hour. And I think my mate left. And I just walked over to the girls after and I said, look, absolutely brilliant, loved it. And I just gave them a card and left. They rang and we met, and they'd made an album. I can't remember what it was called now. Damn. Sorry, I'm just having a moment. And so I said, you know, I'd be interested in managing and see if we can take this someplace further. To cut a long story short, they agreed, we did. So I know a genius who I met at Peter Gabriel's Real World called Richard Evans.
Right.
And who I think I first met, I don't know if he was, I can't remember. Sorry, Richard, I think he might have been an assistant engineer or a tape op. Then he became an engineer. He's also an incredible musician. I mean, he's been in Peter's band for 25 years. And I wanted him to produce. And I only heard one thing that he'd produced before. And he met the girls, loved them. We put 3 extraordinary people with the girls. And we actually used Peter Gabriel's own studio at Real World, which you're not allowed to use, yes, but with permission. And we did some pre-production at Real World, and it's like a rehearsal space. And we went in the studio and we made the album in 10 days.
10 days.
Beginning to end. Recorded, mixed. And I'd done a deal with a company here, really a catalogue company called Castle.
Jeff Kempin, and we know them very well, Castle, absolutely.
Okay, and then...
Terry Shand, that's it, Terry Shand and Jeff Kempin.
Well, at that time, they're now Eagle Rock.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
They're now owned by Universal as well. Yeah. Anyway, so because of... I've been going to America since 70, whatever. And I had to go on a trip to LA, and I'd set up to go meet with Geffen, because, you know, Castle were useless in America. I mean, they would just, you know, schlock it out to somebody. So I went and played it to Geffen, and they loved it. Absolutely loved it. And sorry, girls, but what was extraordinary, this is the end of the 90s, okay, it was 97, is this was a time of, if you like, everything designer, you know, it was all, you know, Ferraris and Rodeo Drive, and, you know, everything was young. And the girls were in their like mid-late 30s, you know, and very real. And so we do the deal with Geffen, a fantastic deal for everybody. And then they want to rent me a house so I can stay there and help plan the launch. And then we're going to do a West Coast swing of shows with Robin Hitchcock, which was perfect audience-wise, and a lot of media. And so we're setting all this up. So I said, because Geffen every single week had a company meeting. So it'd be, where's the focus meeting? So it'd be everybody in promotion, sales, design, the whole company. Even the phones, the receptionist, that went on auto. And I knew this. And I said to Eddie, the president, I said, why don't I bring the girls over and we'd just do a couple of acoustic songs in the conference room. And he said to me, that's a great idea, but it's a huge risk, because if it doesn't work, you've blown it before you start. And I said, I trust the girls implicitly. They're very intelligent as well. And sadly, I can't tell you on air what was said, because it's a bit naughty by one of the girls. But suffice it to say, the whole 15 minutes they appeared in the conference room was a blinding success. The record came out to wonderful reviews, and tip sheets. I don't know your viewers, I don't want to bore people, but that kind of things that were noted in the industry that happened, and there were major magazines, and there was one called Friday Morning Quarterback, FMQB, and it was front page. I mean, it was just amazing. And they started, shipping, selling records, did the first 6 weeks. Then we came back to the UK for a break, and then we were doing the East. And then, I'm not going to go into the details. I get a phone call from the president asking me if I can go back over. This is 2 days later. Wouldn't tell me why. Anyway, so I went back over, and basically Geffen had been bought. And Geffen had to lose 75% of their artist roster, 50% of their staff within a month, and more down the line. So that was pretty much the end of the Dear James.
Yeah, and it's such a shame, isn't it, when that sort of happens? But I mean, the other thing about that sort of time, you also...
But I tell you what you can do, you can plug, and it's the record.
Yeah.
I actually spoke to the girls last year.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to play at the Ken.
Yeah.
In 2019, actually.
Right.
And you can't get it anywhere.
There you go.
So I have a CD still. You can't get it on digital. And I'm like,
crazy.
So because BMG, well, Sanctuary bought Castle.
I know, yeah.
BMG bought Sanctuary.
Yeah.
I speak to BMG, who I know very well.
Yeah.
And I get them to digitize the girls' 2 albums.
Right.
But they only have the rights for the UK and ERA and Ireland.
Okay.
So you can now buy it or download it on Spotify.
Hey, there you go. And the money goes directly to the artist. So that's good. So that's
and it's also, honestly, Andrew, it's a record I'm very proud to have been involved with.
Yeah.
And it sounds as good today as it did when it was made.
And it is these hidden gems, as I call them. This is what we should do. What I love about this, Steve, is that we should shine a spotlight. Absolutely, we should maybe get the girls on there, maybe talk about bits and pieces, and shine a spotlight on these hidden gems, because it's only as a result of putting this in context and all the great stories about Stratton, or great stories about Elvis, and the great stories about your wonderful time at these sort of places, that you can realize there's a lot of stuff which is not out there at the moment. And when I say my background as a lawyer, what we always do is people are talking about rights. It's all about rights and things like that. But people they often warehouse these rights, which means people are sitting on real gems which deserve to have the oxygen of publicity.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, this was kind of slightly highlighted a couple of years, 3 years ago, when there was a major fire at Universal Studios. Yes. And a lot of masters were lost. So a lot of acts, panicking. Where's the multi-tracks? So there have been some great records, that have come out. Maybe didn't do so well, but had a place. That those hidden gems that you refer to. That nobody knows about.
We'll set up a new way of doing things. We call it hidden gems. You and I will have a business together, Steve. We'll do that. Hidden gems.
You can do all the legal side.
I'll do the legal side. We'll do all of it. I love it because it covers all of that sort of stuff. But you then, you're also working with Julian again, having met him, first of all, in 1983. He was also part of this. How did that come about again?
I've got to be careful now. Let me think. Okay, so I think it's pretty well known that you know, when we signed Julian, he was broke. He hadn't received anything from the family. And in fact, when we signed him, there was a lawyer involved, nothing to do with charisma, who was talking to Yoko, let's say.
We get everywhere, us lawyers, you know.
Yes. And but nothing happened. And then, you know, we made the first album, had phenomenal success. And then when I left Charisma, Julian basically had a great time because he finally had money and he was a young man and doing what young people should, enjoying themselves. And then he went to make his second record. And sadly for me, between Virgin and Atlantic, they got Phil in to do the second one, which was never the plan. And Julian had not been writing a lot because he was having a good time. So the second album had probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 songs that we had rejected for the first album. But they put it out and it, you know, it did okay. And then he changed management. Then they brought in Pat Leonard, who was producing Madonna, which I could never understand to this day, to produce him. That didn't do well. Then he co-wrote a song beginning of the 4th album process, but he was then going to work with Bob Ezrin, which sadly should have been the second record. Bob Ezrin, people know from Floyd, from Peter Gabriel, and many others. And what Bob did was, Julian lived in Los Angeles then, and he hired, like, you know, the strip malls.
Yeah.
And he found a strip mall near Julian's. I think it was in Universal City. One of the units was empty. So I said, right, I'll produce it. You're going to go in and you're going to write. I'm going to put your keyboard in and you're just going to write and write. Every day you go to work and write. And he also co-wrote, and he wrote, was it Paul Buchanan from Blue Nile? Yeah. And they wrote a song called Saltwater. Beautiful.
It gets in your eyes. I love that song. And his voice.
I think the Australian government ran it as part of their environmental program for a long time. He made his 4th album, but it didn't really happen. And then I think he got disillusioned with the whole music side. And then apparently there was some kind of settlement. And next thing I know, I get a phone call from actually his kind of business manager saying, Jules is in the studio. He's been recording in London. Would love to see you. So I went along to the studio. Great to see him. And played me a load of tracks. And it was just, yeah, I thought it was really good and it was great. And he said he wanted to start his own label. You know, would I set it up for him? So we talked quite a lot about that. And if it had any real ambition, or it's just he wanted it to be his, not anybody else's, but he would need licensees and so on. So I basically set that up for him for a year. We finished the record. I set up all his licensing deals around the world. In fact, when was it? And my last email from Jules was a couple of weeks ago.
Well, right, okay.
Yeah.
What did the email say?
He's looking forward to having a cup of tea when he next comes over.
Hey, there you go. Very good.
Yeah, when he moved to Los Angeles, as opposed to American or some British artists that have horribly ostentatious places, Julian got this kind of small bungalow kind of very European kind of cottage in the hills, Hollywood Hills. And every time I was in Los Angeles, which was often, you know, I mean, this is after Charisma, I'd always go to his house, and the first thing, because he had huge, like pint tea mugs, and he'd made a great cup of tea, and we'd always have tea.
What sort of
his email about, you know,
what sort of tea would he have? Is he a loose leaf man, or is it a builder's tea, or a
both?
You do all that. Okay.
Both, and no doubt, at his home, he's probably got herbals now as well.
Ah, you see, it's all good stuff.
But he you know, I mean, going back to when we signed him, I mean, because the record just flew.
Yeah.
In America, it just went crazy. So we had to tour. Yeah. He had to be seen to be believed, but he didn't want to tour. One, because he didn't feel he had enough material, because he'd only made one record, and he wanted to follow the Phil Collins path, because Phil never toured until he made 2 albums. But I said to him, as others did, Mike, his agent, you know, we said, you got to, even if we do a shortish tour. So we put a band around him, and we recorded at a Texan rehearsal place called Shoko, very famous.
Shoko, yeah.
And there's a tradition at Shoko that, or there was then, that once you finished all your rehearsals and production rehearsals and you're about to go off, you do one show for all the people that work there. So this is going to be his first ever show in front of people. Right. And there is great footage on a documentary of Julian walking up and down the corridor, almost primal screaming with nerves before going onto the stage. But he's, you know, for me, he's a delight. You know, he was a great young man. He's a very caring older man now, but he got disillusioned. I've just got somebody buzzing me. It's a delivery. Can you give me 30 seconds?
I'll pause it. Okay. Welcome back. So we were just talking, Steve, about Julian Lennon, and what I love about your career, it's peppered with these great stories, because what you do find is that the industry, there are lots of common traits and real characters who keep popping up again, aren't there?
I'll give you my favorite story. You want my favorite story?
Go for it.
Okay. So 83 or 4, very lucky as MD at Charisma, and I'm kind of backwards and forwards to New York every 6 weeks. So now I'm allowed to fly on Concorde. So I think I've done a couple of trips, and I'm on the next one. No, yeah, it's the next one. And I get to Heathrow, and there was a Concorde lounge then. You know, and I'm sitting at a table reading a paper, shortly to board, and I hear like a lot of people and like a humdrum, and I look up and there's like 20 security guys and police, and they're gonna obviously take whoever's in the middle of them onto the plane. And I stand up and I'm having a little look, and I'm sure it's Frank Sinatra. So yeah, we just finished the lot, so yeah, it must have been around that time. Yeah. So anyway, so this person gets on the plane, or whoever's in there, and then they call the boarding. So Concorde had 9 rows, then there was a galley section and toilet, and then there was another 9 rows, whatever it was. And I'm sitting in the last row, which I preferred, in the front section. As I get on the plane, Frank Sinatra is sitting in the first row by the window with nobody next to him. And his personal bodyguard is sitting in the aisle opposite with nobody next to him. So I sit down and we take off, seatbelt sign goes out. Now, up to this point, apart from having the Beatles sign my vinyl, I've never asked an autograph in my life. And I get up in my passport and I'm walking down the aisle, and the bodyguard, you know, with eyes in the back of his head, looks around, looks at me, and I just mouthed, "Autograph, okay?" And he waves me forward. So, excuse me, Mr. Sinatra, can I have your autograph? He takes my passport and a pen. He says, "Sure." He says, "What's your name?" So I said, "Steve." He said, "Sure, Steve." He said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, funny enough," I said, "I'm in the music business, and you've just finished an album with a friend of mine who's been producing with Quincy." And he said, "Oh, you know Phil Ramone?" And I said, "Yeah, because I've just done Julian Lennon record." "Sit down, Steve." So I sat the whole way to New York talking bullshit with Frank Sinatra. And the purser comes over, they've announced and start descending, and comes over, and the purser said, "Mr. Weltman," he said, "are you going to stay here for landing, or are you going to return to your seat?" And I said, I'll probably go back. I've got my bag. And so I'm calling him Frank, by the way, by now. And I said, "Frank," I said, "you know, it's been a pleasure." He said, "Steve, it's been great chatting." He said, "I can't believe as fast as this thing is, it's just gone like that." And I stood up and I got a card out of my pocket, and I gave him the card, and I said, "Frank, is my card. If you're ever serious about a career in music, give me a call." And I looked at him, and first his face all changed. And I thought, that thought bubble, "Weltman, you've blown it."
Right.
And he burst into laughter like you just did.
It's glorious, isn't it? And I tell you what, and it's so refreshing when people are not obsequious and all that sort of stuff. But were you going to get him to sign your passport? Is that what you were going to do?
Yes, and I still have it.
Oh, you do? Did it not invalidate it? Was it okay?
No. He signed like a visa page on what was the old British passport, the old blue one.
Brilliant. Well, we'll have to get it on.
I have 3 signatures in that.
Right.
One was 79 or 80. I'd been in Tokyo for Bowie.
Yeah.
And when I got back to the air to Narita to fly home, and in those days you couldn't fly over Siberia. You had to fly from Tokyo to Anchorage in Alaska, where you would have to deplane for an hour, then refueled it, and then so it was like 18-hour journey. And so I got on. I was in first class and got in my seat, and a chap came and sat next to me, and it was Herbert von Karajan, the maestro. So I got his autographed. And the other one I have is Sir Garfield Sobers.
And that's in your passport as well, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. I love it.
And my favorite one, and this was a child, and I have to thank Strat for this. Well, no, I have to thank Bill for this, who gave me a first class ticket to go to New York. So 74. So I get on Pan Am and I got a window seat. Great. And those days, you know, the old first class seat was like a bed for a little guy like me. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And So as I get to my seat, there's somebody sitting in the aisle seat, which is kind of, you know, huge and away from me, but it's just a newspaper and gloved hands. And I sat in my seat, you know, I didn't dare interrupt anybody. You know, it's my first time in first class as a kid. So doors closed, and the purser comes over to the newspaper and whispers, "The captain has assured me the no smoking sign will go out within 30 seconds of takeoff." Down the runway, seatbelt, no smoking sign goes out. paper comes down, cigarette into a holder, Bette Davis.
No.
I have her autograph as well.
Oh, it's the same passport. Is that close to hand?
No, different passport. Yeah, I can show them.
Oh, brilliant. Well, in the next episode, what we'll do, we'll start with that, when it's like a little teaser. You know how this marketing works. So we'll get Steve Welton and the passport. We're going to get all of those to make that make sense. Fantastic. But we'll just finish off your fantastic career before we come on to Ken's in the next episode. But you then, I mean, fantastic stuff. We talked about Zest Group. You were chief exec of that in 2004. You floated that on AIM, dealing with the money men and so on and so forth. You then became MD of Greensleeves, didn't you? Talk to me about that.
Well, again, for people who don't know, there are two record labels in the reggae field, leaders, VIP out of Jamaica, but based in New York, and Greensleeves. Extraordinary story, Greensleeves. Record shop. It was a record shop in Ealing or some Ealing. Yeah. And owned by an Irish accountant who worked in it. And then he started the label and actually built Greensleeves into the biggest reggae publisher in the world and had the label. And I approached him to acquire the whole thing for Zest. So we acquired it. It needed some reorganization. And so I was kind of 2 days a week at Greensleeves offices in Isleworth, or 3 days, and 2 days in Piccadilly with Zest, but doing things from both. And CFO that I'd taken on, I actually installed in Greensleeves, although he obviously did Zest stuff as well, but he was there all the time because I couldn't be there all the time. And it was just fantastic. I mean, and the most remarkable thing, unfortunately, we had to let go of the A&R guy. But the most remarkable thing is the two heads of the Greensleeves, when we bought it, okay, had never been to Jamaica.
Really?
Had never been. And they had a young writer who, if you like, the music world was getting to know about. And it was one of the first phone calls I made, I think within 2 days of the legal acquisition of the company, because his deal was about to terminate. You know, and I got through to him, and it was basically, you know, he didn't know me from Adam. And it was like, oh, Greensleeves, you know, he said, you know, never have any contact with you people. And, you know, and I said, well, I'm talking to you about extending and changing the relationship. Oh, I'm not interested, man. And I said, well, I'm coming down in about 10 days' time. Just hang on till I get there. You never know. And he was my first meeting. And I signed him to a long-term deal within a week of that visit. But when I got to my hotel, I mean, I set up probably about 30 to 40 meetings. And when I got to my hotel in the morning, my first meeting was like 9:30 at the hotel. About 8 o'clock in the morning, get a call, it's reception. Yeah, there's people here to meet you. I said, well, my first meeting's not till 9:30. No, but I think you should come down, Mr. Weltman. There's about 100 people outside. So it just, you know, gets out in the community. Oh, Greensleeves are coming to Jamaica. So, yeah, I mean, we had some great success very quickly. The young writer, we got a song with Rihanna, song with Sean Paul, got major awards from the American equivalent of PRS, from BMI. As you probably know who that is.
I know that they're neighbours of ours in Harley House. So we
Are you in Harley House? Well, that's Trinifold's old home.
Oh, good old Bill Curbishley, absolutely.
My favourite manager.
Wow, brilliant guy, absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, so we had Greensleeves, and then I was trying to buy another company that I mentioned earlier, where the Nomad was kept putting us off, and we'd had 2008, the crash. It was tough, and the board wanted me to sell Greensleeves,
right.
And I'm like, one, it's stupid. Two, you couldn't have picked the worst time, and so that was also another reason for me to move. But I did at least sell it back I sold it to VP.
Yeah.
So I knew the home was right, and I knew it would at least have a lasting future. But one of the idiot things with the board is, I did a deal with a company called The Orchard.
Yeah.
And that was 2006 or 7. Because Greensleeves, the catalogue wasn't digitized. So this is before, streaming or downloading really took off. But today, I speak to the two brothers own VP, and I speak to one of them a few times a year. I spoke to him, I think, in November. They are absolutely having a ball. Yeah. So, it's a problem where the corporate side, the money side, interferes with the people that know the music side.
And it is interesting that you make that point, and it's peppered all our discussions, because actually the two do go hand in hand. And if you treat people like people, it's rather like, as you say, first time ever Greensleeves has come to Jamaica. Of course you're going to get everybody coming. People do business with people. And as long as you recognize they're individuals and everything else, not just another commodity, that's the way that you can make success. And success follows as a result. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wish I'd worked with people that also thought that way. But, it's like everything. It's again, the further I've gone in years, money has become people's absolute only motivation. And yeah, okay. It's, we're in a capitalist society, so we need money. We all need money. But at what cost? At what cost? And in the arts, we can see the devastation since the pandemic. And obviously I focus on small venues, and for all the techs and the roadies that are out of work. But when you look at, I have a couple of friends in theatre, I have friends in film, and they reckon the music industry alone in the UK is it may be that if things start returning in a little way, but by Christmas we'd lost 170,000 jobs.
Oh, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. And the number of musicians giving up and having to do other things, it's scandalous. We have to look at the contribution that all of the arts make to
absolutely
GDP, and music in particular. Absolutely vital. And you look at important industries like fisheries. Fisheries is very, very important, but it's what we say about the media. They put a spotlight on one, and you sometimes forget all the others. And it's not just the artist on stage doing these fantastic acts, it's the whole people behind them. It's the technicians, it's the roadie, it's the concessions, it's the venues, it's everything. And until we realize that, they are the lifeblood of the society. And I think it's so important. First, we've got to document that whole history, but also recognize the people involved.
No, it's, and it's great that you recognize, if you like, from the bottom up, because of course a major West End actor or a band, you know, who are globally well known can say, oh, I can always get another roadie, or I can always get another caterer, or another lighting guy. But it takes all those pieces of the, you know, look, certainly in music, I can speak firsthand. It's never changed in the sense of it's still a people business.
Yeah.
It's still about people.
Yeah.
Yes. Today, we're using data and we're using analytics. And we didn't have those in the 60s. But the music side of it, the creators and the people that take that music around the world is people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the next episode, Steve, we're going to look at one of the successes, if you like, somebody who utilized lockdown, managed to produce a phenomenal album, The Extraordinary Circumstances, which do feature meetings at airports and chance meetings. We're going to be talking in the next episode all about Ken Hensley and how you met him. But for now, Steve Weltman, thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you, Andrew.
So thank you very much again to Steve Weltman for being my guest today. We're going to get Steve back and discuss about Ken Hensley, the titan of Uriah Heep and the music industry, and how they met, and the extraordinary new album, My Book of Answers. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, write to me at guests@octopustv.com. That's guests@octopustv.com. Don't forget, you can follow me at Andrew Eborn, at Octopus TV, and don't forget to subscribe on all of the usual platforms. But for me, for now, thanks so much for being my guest. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.